She said yes like she'd been waiting forever. And I was the one who'd proposed, and I still didn't know what to do with that. To be clear, it wasn't real. The proposal. I had done it because her ex-boyfriend had cornered her near the fire exit of a pub function room, and I was the nearest person with functioning instincts and very poor impulse control. And I had put my hand on the small of her back and said, to Daniel, "Whoever, sorry, were you talking to my fiancé?" I had not been prepared for her to turn around. I had not been prepared for the way she looked at me. 1 second of reading the situation, reading my face, and then, "Yes. Sorry, I didn't see you come in." She said it to me, not to him. She said it to me like a woman confirming something she had already decided. I shook Daniel Whoever's hand. He left. She looked at the keychain in my pocket that I had instinctively reached for and not used. She said, "Did you just fake propose with nothing?" I said, "I acted in haste." She said, "You're lucky I said yes." I thought about that sentence for the next 6 weeks. My name is Theo Callahan. I'm 34. I work in communications for a mid-sized urban planning consultancy. I make sure that the things the firm wants to say are the things it actually says, which requires a tolerance for the gap between intention and execution that has served me well in most areas of my life, and catastrophically in at least one. I have a flat that is fine, and a commute that is bearable, and a local pub I have strong feelings about. And I have worked at Marchfield Consulting for 3 years, long enough to know where everything is and who everyone is and which meetings can be emails. Long enough to have opinions about the coffee machine and the parking rota and the specific way the afternoon light comes through the west-facing windows, in a way I have never mentioned to anyone. Her name was Priya Media. She was 31. She worked in stakeholder engagement, and she operated with the precise social intelligence of someone who understood, at a structural level, how people worked, what they needed, what they were afraid of, what the gap was between what they said and what they meant. She was very good at her job. She was also the person I talked to most in the building, the person whose opinion I found myself wanting on things that had nothing to do with work. The person who made the office feel like a place I was going to rather than a place I was at. I had told myself this was because she was good company. I had a talent for telling myself things. The ex was called Daniel. He had been out of the picture for 4 months, which apparently meant something different to him than to her. He had shown up at Jamie from accounts leaving due uninvited, which indicated a commitment to poor decisions that I found personally offensive. She had seen him across the function room and gone very still in the specific way of someone cataloging exits. And I had been standing next to her because I was always standing next to her at these things. And I had done what I did. The keychain, for the record, was a small metal loop I kept on my keys for reasons I no longer remembered. It was not a ring. It was not ring-shaped. It was ring-adjacent under certain lighting conditions and with a great deal of goodwill. She had said yes anyway. We did not discuss it that night. We discussed it the following Monday, briefly, in the kitchen at work, which was the correct venue for difficult conversations in the sense that the coffee machine provided ambient noise and an excuse to do something with your hands. She said, "So we're officially engaged." I said, "I think the technical term is fake engaged." Daniel thinks it's real. Daniel has left the situation. I'm not sure Daniel's understanding is load-bearing anymore. She looked at me over her mug with the expression she had when she was deciding how much to say. A few people from the office saw. I know. They're going to ask questions. I know. So we should probably have a story, I said. Yes, I've been thinking about that. She nodded. Me too. A pause. How long have we been together? In the story. 4 months? I offered. 6? Long enough that it's not weird that no one knew. Not so long that it's suspicious we haven't mentioned it. 6 months, she said. We keep it simple. Met outside work, didn't want to make it a thing at the office. It got serious. Right. I looked at my coffee. And the proposal? She smiled once. Spontaneous. Very you. She picked up her mug and left the kitchen, and I stood there in the ambient noise of the coffee machine and thought about the words, very you. She had a story about me. She had it ready. She had not needed to think about it. I had poor survival instincts. I was beginning to think this was terminal. The fake engagement had, I discovered, significant operational weight. People asked, not intrusively, with the warm, slightly nosy interest of colleagues who are genuinely pleased by something and want to understand it. Jamie from accounts, the very person whose leaving due had occasioned the incident, sent a card. Sandra from the 3rd floor asked to see the ring, at which point Priya said we were getting it resized with an ease that suggested she had anticipated this question, which I found interesting. My manager said, "Well done, mate," in a tone that seemed to be about more than the engagement. We had lunch twice that week, which was not unusual. We had lunch regularly, but it felt different now. The way a room feels different when you've rearranged the furniture. Same room. Everything in a new place. She was the same. Precise, quick, attentive in the way she was always attentive. She asked about a project I was stuck on and gave me a note that cracked it open in 4 sentences. She told me about a difficult stakeholder meeting, and I made her laugh twice, which was the metric I had apparently been optimizing for without admitting it. We sat in the usual corner of the usual place, and it was exactly like all the other lunches, except that I was now, technically, her fiancé. A detail I was finding increasingly difficult to treat as administrative. The 3rd week after the proposal, Marcus from her team said at a cross-department briefing, "How's the wedding planning going?" And she said, "Early stages," and then glanced at me, and the glance was so brief and so ordinary that I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking, which I was, because I was always looking. That was the week I stopped telling myself things. The keychain was missing from my keys on a Thursday morning in the 4th week. I noticed, because I always noticed, the specific weight of the set, the familiar arrangement. It was gone. I looked for it in the flat, at the office, said nothing. It had not fallen off. The ring was a solid loop. It didn't come loose. It had been removed by someone who had been close enough to my keys to remove it. I thought about when Priya had last borrowed my car for the supply run to the off-site meeting. I thought about how she had returned the keys to my jacket pocket, not the desk. I thought about the expression on her face for the half-second after she'd handed them back. She had the keychain. I held this information very carefully for 4 days in the manner of a structural surveyor who has found a load-bearing wall he didn't know was there and is deciding what to do about it. On the Monday, I said very casually, "Have you seen my keychain? The small metal loop? It's come off somewhere." She did not look up from her screen. "Can't say I have." I sat down. It was on my keys, and now it isn't. Things fall off keychains. They do, I agreed. Although this one was a solid loop, not really the falling off type. A pause. She was typing. She did not stop typing. "I'll keep an eye out." "Thanks," I said. I went back to work. I was smiling at my screen in a way I hoped was not visible. It was almost certainly visible. 2 weeks later, at the work Christmas drinks, 5 weeks after the proposal, early December, The function room of the same pub looking entirely different, dressed for a party. I found her on the small balcony at the back, the one with the string lights and the cold air, half inside her coat. She had a drink, I had a drink. The party was audible behind the glass doors. "Cold out here," I said. "Inside's loud." Also true. I stood beside her at the railing. Below us, the pub's small courtyard, the string lights reflecting in the wet paving stones. "Can I ask you something?" She looked at me sideways. "Why the balcony? Specifically?" "Every work thing we've ever been to, you disappear to the quietest edge of it for 10 minutes halfway through." "I've noticed. I've never asked." She was quiet for a moment. "I need to recalibrate. Stakeholder work is, you spend all day managing how people feel and what they hear and what they walk away with. By the middle of the evening, I need 10 minutes where I'm not doing that. Where you don't have to manage. Where I don't have to manage." She looked out at the courtyard. "You're one of the only people who doesn't make that worse. Being near you, I mean. You're very—" She stopped. "You're easy to be near." I looked at her. She was not looking at me, which meant she had said the true thing and was giving herself a moment before she had to look at what she'd done. "Priya." She looked at the string lights. "I know you have the keychain." She went still. Not dramatically. Just still. I worked it out about 4 days after it went missing. I kept my voice level. I've been sitting with it since then. A long pause. Below us, someone in the courtyard laughed. The lights moved slightly in the cold air. "I was going to put it back," she said, very quietly. "When?" "When I'd figured out." She stopped. "When I decided what I was going to do about the fact that I'd taken it." She turned to look at me then, properly, without the management layer. "I took it the day after the proposal. I don't entirely know why. I looked at it and I couldn't not. Something in my chest did something I had been expecting for weeks and was still not prepared for." "You said yes like you'd been waiting," I said. "I've been thinking about that since the night it happened. Not the yes, the like. The way it came out. I've been very careful not to look at it directly, because looking at it directly meant looking at why I proposed in the first place. And there were other people at that pub, and Daniel was right there, and I could tell myself it was just impulse," she said. "Instinct," I said. "There's a difference." I turned to face her properly. "I put my hand on your back and said you were my fiancé before I'd thought about it, and that tells you something about what my instincts think you are." I watched her face change, just slightly, the surface moving. I'm not good at saying things before I know they're true. I need to know they're true first. This is true. She looked at me for a long moment. The lights moved. The party went on behind the glass. "I have the keychain," she said, "in my coat pocket right now. I've had it on me every day for 5 weeks. That is either very embarrassing or very telling, depending on how this conversation ends." I think we both know how this conversation ends. She reached into her pocket and held it out between us. The small, impractical, definitely not a ring metal loop, worn slightly from 5 weeks in her pocket. I took it. Then I held it out to her, differently this time, the way you hold something out when you're giving it rather than returning it. She looked at it, then at me, the party behind us, the cold air, the courtyard lights. "This is the least romantic proposal object in recorded history," she said. "I acted in haste, both times." "You keep saying that. It keeps being true. She took it, and I held her hand around it. And she laughed. The real laugh, the one that arrived without announcement. And leaned forward and kissed me there on the cold balcony with the string lights and the sound of the party through the glass. And it felt exactly like the truest version of something that had been almost true for a very long time. The glass door opened, and Marcus said, "Oh, brilliant," at a volume that suggested he had been watching through the glass for at least 30 seconds. And behind him, a significant portion of the communications and stakeholder teams began making a noise that I could only describe as enthusiastic. Priya pulled back and looked at our colleagues with the expression of a woman who managed stakeholders for a living and was briefly unable to deploy any of those skills. "The ring is being resized," I told them. We mentioned this. 3 months later, she put the keychain on her actual key ring, on the set she used every day. Not instead of a ring, she did eventually have a ring, a real one, chosen together on a Saturday in February, when she overruled 3 of my suggestions on grounds of taste, and I agreed with all 3 rulings immediately. Which she said was suspicious, and I said was instinct. The keychain went on her keys alongside it, which she said was because it was useful for her locker at work, and I said was because she was sentimental, and she said those 2 things were not in conflict. They were not in conflict. That was consistently the thing about us. What looked like disagreement was usually just 2 angles on the same true thing. And we had learned, fast and specifically, to find the thing rather than argue the angle. A year later, when people asked about the proposal, and they always asked, because the real story had leaked eventually, in the way that all true things leak, and it was better than the cover story anyway. She told it from the fire exit, from Daniel's face, from "Sorry, were you talking to my fiancé?" and the hand on her back in the half second where she'd read my face and decided. I told it from the keychain, from a Monday morning kitchen and very you said without thinking, from a metal loop that was not a ring and never had been, sitting in her coat pocket for 5 weeks like a decision she hadn't made yet, but already knew she'd make. Both versions were true. That was the thing about us. We'd been telling the same story from different angles. We just needed a bad ex in a function room and my catastrophic impulse control to finally say it out loud. What would you have done if someone fake proposed to save you, and part of you didn't want it to be fake? And have you ever done something impulsive that turned out to be the most honest thing you'd ever said? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one got you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.